Picture this. You're scrolling through someone's social media profile. Hundreds of posts, interesting captions, thoughtful comments, active engagement, but not a single photo of their face. Not one. And your brain immediately does something fascinating. It starts filling in the blanks. Who is this person? What are they hiding? Why are they invisible? But what if I told you? The psychology behind this behavior has almost nothing to do with hiding. What if the real story is actually about something far more powerful than that? Stay with me, because what you're about to hear might completely change how you see yourself and the people around you. Today, we're going into the actual psychology behind people who never share their photos online. Not the assumptions, not the surface-level explanations, the real patterns, the real science. And by the end of this video, you're going to understand something most people spend their entire lives never questioning: what it actually means to choose invisibility in a world that's obsessed with being seen. Let's get into it. Here's the thing most people get completely wrong. When someone never posts their photo online, the default assumption in our culture is almost always negative. Shy, awkward, low self-esteem, something to fix. But psychology tells a very different story. Researchers who study digital behavior have found that the decision to stay visually private online is rarely random. It's almost always connected to a deeper, more deliberate relationship with identity. And that relationship? It tends to look nothing like insecurity. In fact, in many cases, it looks like the opposite. Let me explain something about how your brain processes social media. Every time you post a photo of yourself online, your brain registers something specific. An audience, even if you can't see them, even if they never respond. And here's where it gets genuinely fascinating. Neuroscientists have discovered that the brain doesn't clearly separate imagined observation from real observation. Meaning, just thinking about strangers looking at your photo activates the same stress-related brain regions as actually standing in front of a crowd being judged. For people who are neurologically more sensitive to social evaluation, and a significant portion of the population this experience isn't just uncomfortable. It's genuinely draining. So when someone chooses not to post their photo, part of what they're doing is protecting their nervous system from a low-grade, but very real source of chronic stress. That's not weakness. That's self-awareness. Now here's a concept that doesn't come up enough in these conversations. Some people have what psychologists describe as a strong boundary between their private self and their public self. Not because they're two-faced, not because they're deceptive, but because they intuitively understand that who you are, your actual lived experience, your values, your relationships, is a fundamentally different thing from who you appear to be in a curated digital space. For these individuals, posting a personal photo online doesn't feel like sharing. It feels like reducing, like compressing something complex and real into something flat and performative. And that feeling? Psychologists actually validate it. Research in identity theory suggests that people who maintain strong separation between their private and public selves tend to report higher levels of authenticity in their real-world relationships. Think about what that means. The person who never posts their face online might actually have a richer, more grounded sense of who they are than someone whose identity is constantly being shaped by likes and comments. There's another layer here that explains a lot. In psychology, there's a well-established concept called the need for autonomy, the fundamental human drive to feel that your choices, your identity, and your self-expression belong to you. For people who don't share photos online, this need often shows up as a quiet but firm resistance to performing their life for an audience they didn't choose. Because that's what social media photo culture has quietly become, hasn't it? A performance, a highlight reel, a constant, low-level audition for approval. And some people, not because they're broken, but because they're self-aware, simply opt out of that audition. Not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly, consistently, on their own terms. Here's the angle that almost never makes it into these conversations. A portion of people who don't post their photos online aren't driven by anxiety at all. They're driven by something almost entirely opposite, a settled, stable sense of self that genuinely doesn't need external confirmation. Psychologists call this an internal locus of identity. It means your self-worth isn't a number that goes up and down based on how strangers react to your face. You know who you are, and that's enough. Research consistently shows that people with this psychological profile engage less with social media overall, not because they're disconnected from the world around them, but because they're unusually connected to themselves. And in a culture that has quietly redefined self-worth as something you earn through visibility, choosing to exist without performing is actually a radical act of psychological independence. Here's something researchers didn't predict. It's not just older generations quietly stepping back from photo culture online. A growing number of people in their 20s and 30s, people who grew up with social media, are making deliberate, conscious choices to keep their image offline. Not because they don't understand the internet, because they understand it too well. They've watched what happens when your image lives in digital spaces permanently. They've seen how photos get screenshotted, shared, misrepresented, and used in ways the original person never intended. For this group, keeping their face off social media isn't about fear. It's about having a clear, informed boundary around something they consider genuinely valuable. Their own image, their own story, their own narrative. And that's not paranoia. That's digital literacy. So let's bring this together. Because the pattern across all of these psychological profiles is actually the same at the core. Whether it's nervous system sensitivity, identity separation, the need for autonomy, quiet self-assurance, or conscious digital boundaries. Every single one of these comes down to one thing: a relationship with a self that doesn't depend on being seen to feel real. And maybe, in a world that has made visibility feel like a requirement for significance, that's the most quietly powerful psychological position a person can hold. The people who never post their photos aren't missing something. In a lot of cases, they've figured something out. So where do you land on this? Are you someone who shares freely online, or someone who keeps their image quietly private? Drop it in the comments. I'm genuinely curious about the mix in this community. If this video made you think differently about something you assumed you already understood, that's exactly what this channel is built for. Hit subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. And speaking of which, next video, we're going into the psychology of people who delete their social media entirely. Not just go quiet, but walk away completely. The reasons are not what you'd expect. I'll see you there.